Welcome to CEO's Library, the 1% bookshelf. Today we're diving into a book that has revolutionized the way we think about startups and innovation. But before we begin, let me ask you a question. What if you could build a successful startup without wasting years and millions of dollars? Sounds too good to be true, right? Well, that's exactly what Eric Ries proposes in his groundbreaking book, The Lean Startup. I'm your host, and in this episode, we're going to explore how Ries's methodology is changing the game for entrepreneurs worldwide. Whether you're a first-time founder with a big idea or a seasoned entrepreneur looking to innovate within an existing company, the principles we're about to discuss could be the key to your next breakthrough. So, let's dive in and discover how to build a lean startup machine. Eric Ries, a serial entrepreneur and pioneer in the lean startup movement, wrote The Lean Startup based on his experiences in the trenches of startup life. He saw firsthand how traditional business practices were failing new ventures, and he set out to create a new methodology that would increase the chances of startup success. At its core, the lean startup is about one thing: learning. But not just any kind of learning. It's about validated learning. It's about figuring out the right things to build, products that customers actually want, in a fast, efficient manner. It's about making constant adjustments and pivoting when necessary, all based on real-world feedback. Now, you might be thinking, that sounds great, but why do we need a new approach? What's wrong with the way we've always done things? Well, let's talk about that for a moment. The traditional approach to building a startup goes something like this. You have a great idea. You spend months, maybe even years, perfecting your business plan. You raise a bunch of money. You hire a team. You build your product in stealth mode. And then, finally, you launch, only to find out that no one wants what you've built. Sound familiar? It should, because this is the story of countless failed startups. In fact, according to various studies, up to 90% of startups fail. And the number one reason for failure? Building a product that nobody wants. But why does this happen? It's because of what Ries calls the "build it and they will come" fallacy. Too many entrepreneurs fall in love with their initial idea and assume that if they build it perfectly, customers will naturally flock to it. They operate based on untested assumptions about what customers want, often spending huge amounts of time and money before getting any real market feedback. This approach is fundamentally flawed because it ignores one crucial fact. In a startup, you're not just executing a plan, you're searching for a plan that works. You're trying to find a sustainable business model in an environment of extreme uncertainty. Let me give you an example. Back in the early 2000s, there was a company called Webvan. They had a great idea. Deliver groceries ordered online. They raised over $800 million in funding, built massive automated warehouses, and expanded rapidly. But they did all of this before validating whether customers actually wanted their service or if their business model was viable. The result? Webvan went bankrupt in 2001, becoming one of the biggest flops of the dot-com era. Now, contrast that with a more recent company in the same space, Instacart. They started small, tested their concept in a limited market, and gradually expanded as they learned and validated their model. Today, Instacart is a multi-billion-dollar company. The difference? Instacart followed a lean approach, while Webvan followed the traditional plan everything in advance method. This is why we need a new approach. The lean startup methodology is designed to eliminate this waste and increase the chances of building something people actually want. And at the heart of this methodology is what Ries calls the build, measure, learn feedback loop. So, what exactly is the build, measure, learn feedback loop? Well, it's a core concept of the lean startup methodology, and it's designed to help startups learn as quickly and efficiently as possible. Here's how it works. First, you build something, but not a fully featured product. Instead, you build what Ries calls a minimum viable product, or MVP. We'll dive deeper into MVPs in a bit, but for now, think of it as the smallest thing you can build to start the learning process. Next, you measure. You put your MVP in front of real customers and collect data on how they interact with it. This isn't just about collecting any data, though. It's about collecting the right data, what Ries calls actionable metrics. Finally, you learn. Based on the data you've collected, you learn whether your original assumptions were correct or not. Did customers behave the way you thought they would? Did they find value in what you built? Then, based on what you've learned, you make a decision. persevere with your current strategy, or pivot to a new one. And then the cycle begins again. You build the next iteration, measure its performance, and learn from the results. The key here is speed. The faster you can go through this loop, the faster you can learn, and the less time and money you'll waste building things that don't work. Let me give you a real-world example of how this works. Ries tells the story of how they used this approach at IMVU, a social network he co-founded. When IMVU first started, they had a hypothesis. People would want to use their product as an add-on to existing instant messaging networks. They spent 6 months building this product, only to find out that customers didn't want to use it that way at all. But instead of giving up, they went through the build, measure, learn loop. They quickly built a standalone version of their product, measured how customers used it, and learned that this was what people actually wanted. By going through this loop rapidly, they were able to pivot their strategy and eventually build a successful product with millions of users. The build, measure, learn loop is powerful because it keeps you focused on what really matters: learning. In a startup, learning is the unit of progress. It's not about how many features you build or how much code you write. It's about how much you learn about your customers and your market. Now, let's dive deeper into the first step of this loop: build. Specifically, let's talk about the concept of the minimum viable product, or MVP. The MVP is one of the most misunderstood concepts in the lean startup methodology. Many people think it means building a half-baked product, or a prototype that's not ready for real customers. But that's not what Ries means at all. An MVP is the version of a new product that allows a team to collect the maximum amount of validated learning about customers with the least amount of effort. In other words, it's the smallest thing you can build to start the learning process. The key word here is viable. An MVP isn't just a prototype. It's a real product that early adopters can use and provide feedback on. But it's also minimum. It doesn't have all the bells and whistles you might eventually want to add. It focuses on the core value proposition of your product. The purpose of an MVP is to start the learning process as quickly as possible. It's about testing your fundamental hypotheses about your business. Do people want what you're building? Will they pay for it? How will they use it? One of the best examples of an MVP comes from Dropbox. Before building their full product, the founders of Dropbox created a simple video demonstrating how their product would work. They didn't actually build the product. They just showed how it would function. This video served as their MVP. They put it online, targeted it at communities of tech early adopters, and watched what happened. The response was overwhelming. Their beta waiting list went from 5,000 people to 75,000 overnight. What's crucial here is that Dropbox validated their core assumption, that people wanted this type of file syncing product. Before writing a single line of code for the actual product, they learned an incredible amount with very little effort. Another great example comes from Zappos, the online shoe retailer. When Zappos first started, the founder didn't build a complex e-commerce site or invest in inventory. Instead, he went to local shoe stores, took pictures of their inventory, and put those pictures online. When someone ordered a pair of shoes, he would go back to the store, buy the shoes, and ship them to the customer. This approach was clearly not scalable, but it wasn't meant to be. It was an MVP that allowed Zappos to test their core hypothesis. Would people be willing to buy shoes online without trying them on first? By validating this assumption early, Zappos was able to then build their business with confidence. The power of the MVP is that it allows you to start learning from customers immediately. Instead of spending months or years building a product based on untested assumptions, you can find out quickly whether you're on the right track. But building an MVP is only the first step. Once you've built it, you need to measure its impact. And this brings us to one of the most important concepts in the lean startup methodology: innovation accounting. Innovation accounting is Ries's term for the rigorous process of measuring progress in a startup. It's about replacing the fuzzy, often vanity-based metrics that many startups use with clear, actionable metrics that link directly to the drivers of the business. To understand why this is so important, we need to talk about the problem with vanity metrics. Vanity metrics are the types of measurements that make you feel good, but don't actually tell you anything meaningful about your business. Things like total registered users, total downloads, or gross revenue. These metrics are problematic because they almost always go up and to the right. They make it easy to fool yourself into thinking you're making progress when you're not. For example, your total number of users will almost always increase over time, but that doesn't tell you if those users are actually engaged or if they're getting value from your product. Instead of vanity metrics, Rise advocates for the use of actionable metrics. These are metrics that tie directly to the core drivers of your business and help you make decisions. For example, instead of looking at total registrations, you might look at the percentage of registered users who become active users. Instead of total revenue, you might look at revenue per customer. These metrics give you a much clearer picture of the health of your business and help you identify areas for improvement. One of the key tools in innovation accounting is cohort analysis. Instead of looking at cumulative totals, cohort analysis looks at the behavior of distinct groups of customers over time. This allows you to see if your product is actually improving over time or if you're just accumulating more users. Ries gives an example from his time at IMVU. They had been working hard on improving the product, adding new features and fixing bugs. The total number of users was going up, which made them feel good. But when they looked at the behavior of each cohort of new users, they realized that the percentage of users who became active and paid for the product wasn't improving. This was a wake-up call that led them to radically rethink their approach. Innovation accounting also involves setting up clear learning milestones. Instead of traditional business milestones like shipping a feature or hitting a certain revenue target, learning milestones focus on validating specific hypotheses about your business. For instance, a learning milestone might be validate that 40% of users who sign up will use the product at least twice in their first week. This kind of milestone keeps you focused on learning and improving rather than just executing a plan. The power of innovation accounting is that it keeps you honest. It prevents you from fooling yourself with vanity metrics and forces you to confront the reality of how your business is actually performing. And this, in turn, helps you make better decisions about when to persevere with your current strategy and when to pivot. And that brings us to our next topic, the pivot. The concept of the pivot is central to the lean startup methodology, and it's one of the most powerful tools in an entrepreneur's arsenal. A pivot, as Ries defines it, is a structured course correction designed to test a new fundamental hypothesis about the product, business model, or engine of growth. It's not just changing direction on a whim. It's a deliberate, data-driven decision to test a new approach based on what you've learned. The key thing to understand about pivots is that they're not a sign of failure. In fact, they're a sign that you're learning and adapting. Some of the most successful companies in the world have gone through major pivots. YouTube started as a video dating site. Slack began as a game company. Twitter emerged from a podcasting company called Odeo. Rise identifies several types of pivots, including 1. Zoom-in pivot, where a single feature becomes the whole product. 2. Zoom-out pivot, where the whole product becomes a single feature of a much larger product. 3. Customer segment pivot, where you realize you're solving the right problem, but for a different customer than you originally thought. 4. Business architecture pivot, where you switch from high margin, low volume to low margin, high volume, or vice versa. 5. Value capture pivot, where you change your monetization or revenue model. 6. Engine of growth pivot, where you change your growth strategy. 7. Channel pivot, where you change your distribution channel. 8. Technology pivot, where you deliver the same solution through a completely different technology. Let's look at a real-world example of a successful pivot. Ries tells the story of Votizen, a company that wanted to create a social network for verified voters. They spent months building this product, only to find that people weren't really interested in using it. But instead of giving up, they pivoted. They realized that while people weren't interested in a full social network, there was demand for a tool that would allow people to connect with their elected representatives. So they pivoted to create a social lobbying platform that allowed people to contact their representatives through existing social networks. This pivot was successful because it was based on what they had learned from their customers. They kept the parts of their product that were working, voter verification, and changed the parts that weren't, the social network. The ability to pivot is what separates successful startups from failures. It's about being responsive to what you're learning from your customers and the market, rather than stubbornly sticking to your original plan. But pivoting isn't easy. It requires admitting that your original hypothesis was wrong, which can be tough for many entrepreneurs. It often means throwing away code and features you've worked hard on. But remember, if you're learning, you're not failing. You're getting closer to a product that customers actually want. As we wrap up our discussion of the lean startup, let's recap the key principles we've covered. 1. The build, measure, learn feedback loop is at the heart of the lean startup methodology. It's about building something quickly, measuring its impact, and learning from the results. 2. The minimum viable product, MVP, is about starting the learning process as quickly as possible. It's not about building a prototype. It's about building the smallest thing that allows you to start learning from real customers. 3. Innovation. Accounting is about measuring what matters. It's about replacing vanity metrics with actionable metrics that help you make decisions and drive your business forward. 4. Pivoting is a structured course correction. It's not about failing. It's about being responsive to what you're learning and adapting your strategy accordingly. These principles aren't just for new startups. They can be applied in any situation where you're trying to create something new under conditions of extreme uncertainty. That could be a new product in an established company, a non-profit organization, or even a government initiative. The lean startup methodology is about reducing risk and increasing the odds of success. It's about learning quickly, adapting to what you learn, and ultimately building something that customers actually want. So, whether you're a first-time entrepreneur with a big idea, or a manager in a large corporation trying to drive innovation, I encourage you to apply these principles. Start small, learn fast, and don't be afraid to pivot when the data tells you to. Remember, the goal isn't to avoid mistakes. It's to learn from them as quickly and cheaply as possible. As Eric Ries says, the only way to win is to learn faster than anyone else. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the lean startup. If you found this valuable, I encourage you to pick up a copy of the book. The link is in the show notes. And remember, you can find the full transcript of this episode, along with helpful visualizations, at ceoslibrary.com. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible. This is CEO's Library, the 1% bookshelf, signing off.